school money just to make sure the books are in order, blah, 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 and all that stuff. But I always remember how efficient and great. Now, and I welcome accountability. And then all of a sudden you see what some people did in the regulation, the bankers and things like that. It just blew my mind away. The poorest schools in Ireland and the deaf schools nowadays were more efficient in managing public money than a lot of people have squandered. So what I'm using the argument is, public servants, which I strongly support, have to deal with this issue in reform in a very, so you take responsibility. And if you're in the HSE, you take responsibility. And that's why in this legislation, the additional accountability arrangements for the HSE, to me, are a very important reform. And I think there should be nothing wrong with that. And if people don't want to take responsibility or don't want to be accountability, forget the day job. We need people in jobs that love their jobs and get up in the morning and go in there. And we also need to look at the idea of the good old-fashioned quality public servant, whether you're a teacher, a guard or a nurse or a postal worker or something like that, people who like and serve the community and know they're being paid out of public money and they develop accountability. Sadly, over the last 10 years, that hasn't been in existence in the HSE. And I think it's important to say that. And I say that in relation to, there are positive things in the HSE. We have brilliant staff, we have brilliant professionals out there as well, but we also have major flaws and inefficiencies. And I don't accept that people should do their best at all times in relation to this issue. So if people are involved, if there are 20 people on trolleys tomorrow morning up in Beaumont Hospital, I want the Minister to be accountable, but I also want the managers to be accountable, and I want to see the accountability comes from the HSE as well. And that's the important thing as well. To go back to the other broader issues as well, I think it's very important. I mentioned Hugo Chavez in my speech there because he spent a lot of his oil money in relation to developing the health services, and he also reducing poverty in Venezuela. But we also need to look very, very closely at the fact that we need to ensure that this 13 billion is spent in a very, very sensible way. Just to say as well, it's important to mention too that when you're talking about the broader reform of the health service as well, as we need to get people, and we need to develop this whole idea of stopping people as far as possible from going into the emergencies and A&E rooms because we need to ensure that there's efficiencies there. And I think part of that policy has got to be dealing with the GPs issue, but also dealing with the medication issue as well. And that's where I disagree with the government. When you look at issues like in relation to people with a disability, and if you cut their respite care grant by €325, I don't accept that that cut was acceptable in any financial way as well, both from a human rights level, but also in the fact is, if you take money from people out in the community, at some stage they're going to end up in the system and they're going to be involved professionally in the system, and they're going to cost more money as well. So what I'd say to the Minister in this debate is, where prevention is a very important part of any health strategy. And if you have somebody surviving with a disability, for example, surviving with a few extra bob and a respite care grant or some sort of other monetary, let's make sure that those persons, that they're looked after in that way as well. And can I say as well, a lot of parents of people with disabilities, the regular comment to me is that they come to me and said to me that they pay their taxes every week, and yet when they go looking for a service, they have to reduce service or take a hit. And that's not acceptable. People forget about that. 13% of the population are people with a disability or families directly affected by a disability. And what they're telling me is, and I will be their voice in Dáil, Éireann, is to ensure that they go to work every week, those that have jobs, they pay their taxes, so they're entitled to look for a service. And I just don't think it's acceptable. I have one constituent at the moment who's a very disabled young man, and he was in a 5-day service in CRC in Clontarf, and now he's reduced down to three-day service. I don't think that's acceptable in any society, and regardless of what people say. And I don't accept as well, when you have a 13 billion budget in there, that some reasonable, sensible way can be found to fund that particular issue. And I think that's
just
very
a minute
important.
left.
Okay. So I think I mentioned these issues. So when you're talking about reform, yes, I'll support the reform proposals in this legislation. I have a broader view on the health service. Mine would be more suitable, more towards the Cuban model. I know Minister O'Dowd would be very interested in that as well. And maybe a week in Cuba might do him good as well. It might cheer him up, and he could have a look at the health service as well and see the efficiencies they have there at the health service. I beg your pardon? Well, I must say, yeah, well, I mean, if you were being hammered by a blockade, I was there, I've been there as well, for Minister Dáil. I wasn't there on official visit, actually.
You were a guest at the stage.
No, I was
having a look at it.
But I saw the health service, I saw the primary school service, and I saw a service for disabled children from the cradle to the grave, which is very interesting, which I didn't see in this country. So just to make that point. But to go back to the broader issue, Carling, I just want to say, open your minds, open your eyes to the government parties. There are certain things in some countries that are done well. Let's look at them. Let's follow good practice. I'm not saying I have the solution to every economic and social problem in the world, but I kind of finally say is, if we listen to some of the ideas of great people like Hugo Chavez, we won't go wrong, and particularly in relation to this health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy. The next speaker is on the government side, and it's Deputy Pascal Donoghue. 20 minutes, Deputy.
Thank you, Lascian Corner. Well, I want to assure Deputy McGrath that now that he's successfully made the link between the death of President Chavez and HSE corporate governance, it's a point I'm going to touch on as well. In the spirit of the fact that he's correct that our minds should be open to new ideas and things that are working well in other countries. And that we should look at models that work elsewhere and see if they're applicable to Ireland. A point I would make in return to that is I think the most dangerous threat that the idea of that the concept of representative politics faces is the idea that all politicians are the same. It's that the idea that ideology doesn't matter, that policy doesn't matter, that whoever you vote for, you're going to get the same outcomes and the same policy. And that's something that's particularly relevant to Ireland at the moment as we struggle with the terrible financial difficulty that we're in, as we look to exit a bailout programme later on in the year. And I think this is also a concern across Europe, as people look at the relationship that individual nation states have with the European Union, their interaction abroad, that regardless of the government, the outcomes are going to be the same. And it's in that spirit that, I mean, President Chavez did offer a different view regarding how his country could be run, regarding the role that government could play. And even though I did have concerns and worries regarding some of the things that he did and some of the directions that he wanted to take, he clearly mattered deeply to the people of Venezuela and to the idea that politics could matter and could make a difference. And because of that, his death and the demise should be recognised and sympathy should be extended. And Deputy McGrath is correct in that regard. It's in that spirit, though, that I want to just go back to what this debate is about, which is about the role of the HSE and its future here in Ireland. And something that I was very struck by was in the opening ceremony of the Olympics in Britain, which was a fantastic ceremony that was orchestrated by one of their leading film directors. What was striking about that is the role that the recognition of the NHS played in that. If you looked at the ceremony, they had people out there that were celebrating the role of the NHS, celebrating the role of nurses, of doctors, of the people who run it. And clearly the vision of the people who set up that organisation, of Bevan, of Ackley, of William Beveridge, the idea that they had regarding a welfare state and the difference that it could make, and the war on the four evils, as they described it, clearly resonates with the people with the people of Britain, and resonates to the degree that they wanted to celebrate it in the opening ceremony of the Olympics. And I suppose the question that we have to ask here, and I think this is something that the acting Director General of the HSE touched on, is if a similar ceremony was organised here in Ireland for the opening up of an Olympic or sporting event, would the HSE receive that kind of recognition? And would the HSE deserve get that kind of celebration? And the Director General of the HSE was forced to reluctantly conclude that the answer to that question would be, I think he said, probably not. And I think he's right. We have to ask, why is that? Is it because of the quality of our nurses and doctors? Absolutely not. I think anybody who goes into a GP, goes into a hospital, goes into a primary care centre, always comes away impressed with the quality of care, with the quality of compassion that they get from the people they engage with. Is it because of the quality of the people who are leading our hospitals? I've dealt with many of those people, and I have to conclude myself that the answer to that question is no as well. I've met the Chief Executive of the Mater Hospital on a number of occasions. I've met the people who run Temple Street and look at the work that they do. And they are second to nobody in terms of the commitment that they have for patient care and the commitment that they have to doing all they can to make sure their hospitals offer the best possible environment for people who need care and who want to recover. I was with the Minister there at the opening of St Brendan's, the new Phoenix Daycare Centre there in St Brendan's. I know, unfortunately, he might remember that visit for other reasons, but when the Minister did speak afterwards, he made the point, and he was completely correct, about the heritage and about the tradition of compassion and care in places like that, of people who were hugely vulnerable, who went in and were looked after in the best way that was possible by the staff, despite the limitations that they had. I was with the Minister there for the opening up of the new extensions to Mater Hospital, an extraordinary new facility, opened up in the centre of the inner city. And again, I heard the staff there talk about the kind of care they want to give people in the new facilities that they have. So I look to kind of reconcile the difference between the quality of people that we have within our healthcare, the 13 billion euro that's going into it, and the feeling and the resonance that the HSE, despite that, has with the people of Ireland. And I'm forced to conclude that one of the gaps and one of the difficulties that we have there is in the way we design our healthcare services, the way we look to deliver it, the way we structure the link between money going into our healthcare system and the quality of care that the patient gets at the other end. And I'm forced to conclude there are difficulties there regarding how we do that. Now, as I do that, I also want to acknowledge the huge progress that we're making at the moment, despite the difficulty that we're in. The number of people that are in trolleys in our hospitals versus a year ago is down, despite the fact there is regrettably less money going into them. The number of people who are waiting for daycare operations and care for more than 3 months is down. The number of children who are waiting for urgent medical attention and for urgent operations, they shouldn't have to wait at all, as should none of the other people. But the number of people and the number of children who are on those waiting lists is down as well. So despite everything, progress is being made in many of those areas. But what this bill looks to look at is what is the design of the HSE and how can we change it further to make sure we can get more out of the huge compassion and financial resource that exists within our healthcare services. And I'm certain that the direction that this bill looks to move it in is the right direction to go in. And why is that? Well, I'd ask any deputy in this House here, if they had the privilege of doing Minister Riley's job, with all of the challenges that are there and all of the opportunities that he wants to deliver, do you think he or she would be better placed to do this job after the passing of this bill or not? Surely the answer to that question is they would be better placed to do it. And the reason for that is because what this bill is looking to do is make more consistent and more coherent and more impactful the decisions that the Department of Health make and the Minister himself or herself will make, and the impact that that's going to have on care on the ground. We're looking to strengthen up the accountability and the links of control between decisions that are made at policy level and then how those decisions are actually implemented. And with that in mind, what I want to focus on is a number of additional areas that I want to see improved and I believe will be improved across the coming years. And I make most of these suggestions with the experience of being a member of the Public Accounts Committee, for having the Secretary General of the Department of Health and the acting Director General of the HSE in with us on a number of occasions. And the number of areas that strike me as worthy of further work and focus are firstly the whole issue regarding how we track and how we monitor and the systems that we use within our HSE. I'm always struck when Mr O'Brien comes into our Public Accounts Committee and you ask him a question regarding the level of wages, regarding who's doing what, regarding how allowances are allocated, regarding efficiencies within the system. He makes the point that despite the very best efforts of the HSE and the people involved in it, we still do not have a single system at the moment that's capable of tracking all of the ways in which money is allocated within our healthcare system. Now, as I say that, I'm aware of the caveat to that a number of our hospitals at the moment, in fact, very many of them, are voluntary, what's called so-called voluntary hospitals. In other words, they're not run directly by the state, which is always going to make it very difficult for IT systems and systems to extend into them in the same way as systems will extend into facilities that are directly run by the state. But all that being said, many of the payroll systems that are in operation at the moment are the same payroll systems that were in operation when we had the health board system. And this is despite the fact that the HSE has now been in operation now for many, many years. And as we grapple with the issues of consultant pay, as we grapple with the difficulties of the, for example, how Croke Park 2 will be implemented if the unions vote for it, greater progress in these kind of areas are essential to ensure that a bill like this, when passed, will make the difference that it needs to make. The other area that I'm continually struck by and involved in is the role that early intervention teams can play in dealing with many of the health and quality of life difficulties that our citizens will face. I'm particularly aware, and I'm glad the Minister is here for me to make this point, regarding the role of early intervention teams in the area of speech and language therapy. An unbelievably important area. I have so many parents that unfortunately come to me with difficulties that they have in accessing the services that they need, where they have their children in primary schools, where they're getting the support that they need of their teachers, but they need help and they need support in the right diagnosis of the condition that their young boy or girl might have, and then understanding what is the right path of care for that child and making sure that they get it early. Because as the Minister will know far better than I will, because he's been a doctor, he's experienced in this area, the earlier we get this care and support to young boys and girls, the better it is for them in terms of their lives, the better it is for them in giving them the opportunity to realise the wonderful potential that they have, but also the better it is for our state. Not just because these young boys and girls realise the potential that we want them to have and their children and their families want them to have, but also because it's simply a better way for us to run and fund our health system and our schools. And what I would urge the Minister to do, and I know this is difficult and I know he's managing many other things as well, is that as we find ourselves in a position, and I'm certain that we will, that money becomes available, either through changes that we're making or as new money comes into the systems, as it will, as our recovery accelerates and as our economy do better, is that we do all we can, Minister, to prioritise the care of these young boys and girls and their families. Because I also then deal with the other side of the coin, which is the young men and women that we have trained in the area of speech and language therapy, and that we have trained in the huge expertise of how we diagnose the conditions that these children have and how we support it. And they find themselves in a position where they're unable to get work within our country. And I'll conclude with a third point in relation to this, which is the whole point of reform and agenda and change. And Deputy Graham made the point, which I would agree with, that there's no politician here in this House that isn't in favour of reform, that isn't in favour of change. And I've campaigned on that and talked about it myself many times in the past. But I suppose to introduce a contrarian point or a different point in relation to it, I do think, Minister, we have to get to a point where we say actually no more change. When we say we've brought a system in, which is what we're looking to do, and we simply allowed that system to bed down and to work. Because as much as I believe as reform is needed, and it's what we're going to do and what the government will do, I also do believe that an agenda of continual reform and continual change and continual, maybe even it will feel like upheaval, for many of the people who work in our hospitals. I don't think that's a good thing either. For the people who are working within our hospitals, for our GPs, for our nurses, for our, for our consultants, they are entitled to a period in which they know, right, the big structural changes have happened, we're in a new environment, I am now going to work in that new environment for a reasonable period of time, and we won't look to change it again until we know how this has properly worked. And as somebody who has, the Minister has worked as a doctor and has worked in different parts of our health service, I'm certain that he knows the value of this. As I look at other governments in other countries, for example, I would look at what happened within the United Kingdom, where the agenda of reform was championed particularly by people like Anthony Barber as a civil servant. I would look at the work that people like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron have all done. And they're always talking about reform, always looking to introduce radical change. And I would say, just say to the Minister, when we have this change introduced, and when we have made the fundamental changes in relation to money following the patient, in relation to governance, in relation to how we want to structure and merge the HSE and the Department of Health, to then let that be for a while, and to allow our energies and your attention and the attention of the people within our hospitals to move on to, well, how do we make these processes work, as opposed to continually looking at how the processes themselves need to radically change. And I'll conclude on that point. I think it's just vital when we're having a discussion like this that we do acknowledge the big progress that is being made at the moment, the new facilities that are being opened up. There'll be a primary care centre open within Grange Gorman within a few years' time. That's a gigantic change for the people that I look to represent, that I do represent. There'll be a primary care centre open, I'm sure, in Summerhill, in the inner city, on a piece of land that the late Tony Gregory identified and talked about. That offers colossal change and huge opportunities for the people that we look to serve, in the same way as the rollout of the DDoC service had for people who didn't have choices regarding where to go at the weekend. They didn't want to go into the Mater A&E because they knew the problem they had or their child had, it was serious, but they knew it wasn't quite serious enough to have to go into a hospital. So we gave options to them regarding where they could go. That's made a really big difference. And as I said, many of the waiting lists that we discussed in terms of the number of people in trolleys, the number of people that are waiting for particular operations, they're coming down due to intervention by the Minister and continued work by the people who really care about these things, who are our staff, our nurses and our doctors as well. So I look forward to seeing a bill like this continue that work. I look forward to seeing it clarifying the lines of accountability within our healthcare system and ensuring that we come up with a system that reflects the aspirations of the people who are working in it and meets the needs of the people that we're looking to serve. And I'm sure this bill will represent progress on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. And the next speaker is from the opposition side, and it's Deputy Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. And I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the Minister at the very outset. And I'd like to thank very sincerely the technical group for allowing me some of their time to speak on this Health Service Executive Governance Bill, which is very important. And I myself, back many years ago, started out as a young politician on what was the old Southern Health Board. I really believed in the structures of that board at that time. I learned an awful lot of very valuable lessons from members of the board because, as the Minister would remember, at that time, the setup and the structures of the board were very different to what is there at present. When we'd have our meetings, you had consultants at the meetings, you had TDs, you had councillors, you had a wealth of experience. And I learned an awful lot at those meetings, and working on the old Southern Health Board, I learned an awful lot. It would be very neglectful of me if I didn't mention one great friend that I had at that time. Maybe the Minister might have known him as well. His son is a minister here today, a junior minister, Sean Sherlock. But Joe Sherlock was a man that I had absolute tremendous respect for. I'm sorry he's gone to his eternal reward, but I do know one thing. I know exactly where he is. He's above in heaven today looking down, because the passion that he brought to help our meetings, the forceful way that he fought. I can remember him shaking and trembling when he was fighting about Mallow Hospital. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And he brought a real sincerity to meetings that I valued and I appreciated. And I really mean it. I learned an awful lot from the old Southern Helport. I had respect for the structures of the board at the time, because we had an input at budget time, which, as everybody knows, is very important, because if you're going to influence change, you have to influence budget. And I really thought that the old Southern Health Board was a good model. Unfortunately, doctors differ and patients die. The new HSE was brought into being. When that happened at that time, one of the first things it was deemed in their infinite wisdom was the politicians should be taken off of the HSE. I remember at the time thinking that that was wrong, because I really believed that they brought their own expertise, their own local knowledge from dealing with constituents to meetings, and they were able to raise the issues of importance, which were important locally and nationally and regionally. And when we're speaking about the health boards, of course we're talking in regions. We're not being parochial about it. And I saw right away a very, very big problem with the way the new HSE, as it was at the time, was set up. And I was proven right, because after a while they decided, well, the first thing we'll have to do is bring back the politicians, which they did. And the politicians that came back, I was one of those, and I immediately saw an awful change in the way the structures were working. To me, we were virtually toothless. We were able to go and we were able to attend our meetings, but it certainly was not the same. It didn't have the same effect, or it didn't have the same bite as the old Southern Health Board. I know, Minister, that you have to move on. I know, I appreciate there has to be change. Excellent speakers have spoken here already today about change and about the need for it. I have to say, when it comes to things like the structures of the old Southern Health Board, which I know in today's world wouldn't be fit for practice, I appreciate that. But again, change just for the sake of change is not a thing that I would welcome. Now, I have to say something, Minister, about accountability. I remember when you were an excellent opposition spokesperson on health, and you attacked and berated the Minister for Health at every opportunity, which was your right and which was your job and which you did very effectively, and which in turn ensured that you were going to be the new Minister for Health. But there is one thing that I have to be honest, and you know, on a personal basis, I don't like being critical of you above anybody else over on that side of the house, but that's for personal reasons. So I am going to be very kind to you, but at the same time I have to make this point, and I know you can't disagree with me for making it. If a person stands up here and if they have a health issue that they want to tackle the Minister for Health on, and even if it was only the simplest thing as putting down a parliamentary question to the Minister for Health and getting the response back, I've referred this to the HSE. I have to say, Cathaoirleach, I have to say, Minister, it is maddening. And if you were over here and if you stood up today and if you wanted to debate and engage with the Minister for Health, and if he was there looking at you like you had four heads on you and started saying, will you go away and will you take this up with the HSE? At the end of the day, you are the Minister for Health. And like I say, I'm not being personal to you, and you know I'm not. It is whoever is going to be there in the future as Minister for Health. The buck should stop with them. Every health issue that needs to be discussed or that needs a political airing, at the end of the day, you are the boss. And I absolutely hate this idea of a minister putting up the shutters of the HSE in front of them and saying, it's like a shield, please go away from me, this is not my problem, I'm just the Minister for Health, you must take your problem up with the HSE. That is not, absolutely not good enough. And like I say, you were very forceful with Mary Harney, and I remember nights you berated her and you said, you were the Minister for Health, it's your responsibility. And I remember you saying, don't hide behind anyone else. And what do you do then? When you're in the role yourself, you do the exact same thing. So why don't you change? Why do no, but you do.
That's what this bill is about.
But
If I get rid of the HSE,
yes.
so I do take responsibility.
Well, but right, but there was plenty times you could have changed and handled the situations differently, but you used the system in the same way previous ministers. And talking about previous ministers, and because I will save criticism for other ministers in the past, and they were from other parties other than your own. For instance, we all recognise, and it is nationally and internationally recognised, that our community hospitals are not just essential, but they're vital in delivering healthcare in the regions throughout the country. But, Minister, you're old enough, because you're a lot older than me, to remember when we had ministers in government who thought it was a good idea to close down our community hospitals. In the county that I represent, we had a minister one time who thought it was a great idea to close down the hospitals in Kinmare, Killarney, Carrasiveen, Skibbereen, Mill Street, and a couple of others. And at one swoop of a pen, a minister thought that this was good and that this would be better for the delivery of healthcare. If that had been allowed to have happened at the time, it would have been one of the most disastrous political decisions that was ever made. But thankfully, there was a very forceful chairman of the Old Southern Health Board at the time. His name happened to be Jackie Healy-Rae, and he came to the minister and he laid it on the line to the minister that over his dead body were these hospitals going to close. And that is exactly what happened. There was a desperate argument put up against their closure, and they were saved. And you know that those hospitals, along with all of the other community hospitals around the entire county, every deputy that's inside here, works on a daily basis with the community hospitals in their areas, and they realise and they know how important, whether it is the long stay beds for people who aren't fit to go into nursing homes because they need special medical care, whether it is the physiotherapy services that are offered, whether it is the respite that is offered, what I would call the stepping down of people who are in our larger hospitals and aren't fit to go home, and they go home to their community hospitals to recuperate. And the matrons and the nurses in those community hospitals, I want to pay a very special tribute to each and every one of them here, as I know you would, Minister, because they do Trojan work on a daily and weekly basis, and they really work above and beyond the call of duty. When it comes to speaking about our nurses and our frontline staff and what it means to be a nurse today, you appreciate, Minister, and that doesn't a day go by, but I'm contacted by people working in the health service. And what they're doing, which they're perfectly right and entitled to do, and I appreciate they're doing it, they're highlighting the problems and the inadequacies in the structures that are put in place under which they have to work. I mean, the amount of pressure and the amount of strain and genuine hardship that these people are going through every day carrying out their work, it is really, really staggering. We're dealing, obviously, with an ageing population, which brings on its own pressures to the whole system. But coming back to what it means to be a nurse today, you see, predominantly you could have younger nurses who have their own troubles at home because they have high mortgages, maybe their husband hasn't worked now that would have had in the past, and they're under strain at home, and then when they go to work, they're under severe strain. I the same as I'm no different to any other representative here that knows these people on a personal basis, and we know their personal stories. and they really are feeling the strain. And what they keep saying is that there is no accountability at the top, that everything is being thrown at them, Minister, and it is up to them to deliver the service with very limited resources, and they're really being put through the mill. I want to highlight, Minister, because I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't do so. When we're talking about psychiatric services and when we're talking about the HSE and the way the whole system works, if you take, for example, the way there has been a change made recently with assisted admissions. You know the way assisted admissions were done in the past, right? But now, take for instance in County Kerry, they were done through the Kerry services before, but now they have to go through a company in Kildare. Now think about it. You're going to have an assisted admission in Kerry, and instead of doing it locally within the county, we're employing a company from Kildare to do the work. I've nothing against the people in Kildare. We have great people in Kildare. But why do we have to go to Kildare to employ people to assist with assisted admissions? Now, it's going to cost somewhere in the region of, and I'd like to be contradicted if I can be proved to be wrong, 5 times as much to carry out an assisted admission through this company rather than doing it locally in Kerry. But the difference is, and this is where the trick is, it's like a 3-card trick. That cost is not going to be borne by the Kerry services. It's going to be borne nationally by the HSE, so it won't look as though the budget for admissions in Kerry is going up through the roof. The exact opposite. The cost will go down because the cost is not being charged to Kerry at all. It's being absorbed nationally by the HSE. This, to me, is one of the many examples of changes that are being made, as I've said earlier on, change, but not for a good purpose. It just does not make common sense to me, and I would like, at some stage, if the Minister could deal with this matter. I put down a parliamentary question about it, and I certainly wasn't happy with the reply I got, because to me it does not make financial sense, or it just does not make good work practice sense. Now, coming back to the people that are working in our service, we have the situation, and this is happening in every politician's constituency. We have staff who are working in day centres, and they're being taken out of those day care centres to fill up the required staff levels in our hospitals. This is letting, in many instances, our daycare centres short-staffed, and by their very nature, those daycare centres are assisting predominantly more elderly people, and by taking care of their needs in daycare centres, it's a vicious circle. It's keeping them out of the community hospital. If they're kept out of the community hospital, they're kept out of the regional hospital. And we have always been told that it is better to take care of people's needs at home, or as near to at home as we possibly can. That is why the services of our day centres is invaluable. I work very closely with many of the daycare centres and the health centres in County Kerry, and I see firsthand the excellent service that they provide. Less than a couple of 100 metres from where I live, there is a centre, an Alzheimer's unit, which provides invaluable service to the greater, wider community in my region. And I see on a day-to-day basis the impact, the positive impact that they have on elderly people in the early stages of Alzheimer's, the very positive effect that they have on those people's lives. And I compliment them, the management and the people working in all of those centres, not just in the one near myself, but throughout the county and throughout the country. I compliment them, from the senior staff down to everybody working, because they give great care. We have to emphasise, and I know that this would be because of the fact, and it is a great thing that our Minister for Health is himself a doctor, because he will appreciate and will understand that at all times the patient has to come first. But we have to recognise that we cannot squeeze any more out of the staff working in the service. You can only squeeze so much, and you can't squeeze any more. There are situations that have dogged the health system, in particular over the last number of months. If you only look at the decision by the government to centralise the processing of medical cards, you might say, what does that have to do with the delivery of healthcare on the ground? But it did, because you had people who had medical problems which needed addressing. They wanted to get their medical card. They weren't able to do so because the connectivity that was there in the past in the local regions, where you had a brilliant system. You had the people who were processing the cards were able to deal with community welfare officers, and they were able to deal with community welfare nurses and get information about locals, and they were able to work together in ensuring the speedy and timely delivery of a medical card. Now, if that didn't happen, and if a person could not afford to get their health care taken care of because of the delay, because of the fact that the government had centralised the processing of the cards, that meant that that person's health deteriorated. What might have been a problem that could have been dealt with in a community hospital, all of a sudden had got worse, and they had to go to a regional hospital and take up an acute bed. Now, you, Minister, more than anybody else in this House, knows the cost of an acute bed in one of our main hospitals. It costs enormous sums of money, plus the fact that we do not want to have people lying in trolleys. So again, early intervention, and always remembering that the patient and the patient's concerns and the patient's health comes first. And I know that you appreciate that, Minister. We have to continue in the future to continue the great working relationship with our GPs, who, by using their common sense at all times, do their best to keep people from obviously getting the care that they require, but avoiding unnecessary admissions and doing their work to the best.
Deputy, you just have a minute left. Just
oh, sorry.
You know. Yeah.
I'll have to speed up. So, now, I just want to get in one point, Cahill. Look, I've seen the health service from both sides, because 20 odd years ago, I was a long-term patient myself in hospitals, and I saw, on a personal basis, I saw the great work that is done, and till the day I die, I could never say enough good things for the people that were with me at that time. Accountability, Minister, starts at the bottom, and it also starts at the top, and everybody has to be accountable, including the Minister for Health. Massive sums of money are being spent on health, and it is always, again, if at all possible, to try and save on our budget, to treat people at home. That is why I raised this morning with the Taoiseach the fact that I'm horrified that, again, in County Kerry, our grants for disabled people and elderly people have been slashed from 3.6 million last year to 1.4 million this year, 50% of a reduction. What this is going to lead to, Minister, is that where people could have stayed at home and had downstairs bedrooms and bathrooms, now they may very well take up room in a community hospital. So look, good oversight, good governance is important. I also want to compliment South Dock on the excellent work that they do in my region, and all the other operations that South Dock perform throughout the country. And just to wish the Minister well, and I welcome the fact that that he'll be coming down to join with me in opening a new hospital in Kinmare in the near future, and next year a new 40-bed unit for psychiatric services in Killarney.
Can I call on the government spokesperson now? Deputy Willie Penrose is the first speaker, and I understand you're sharing your time.
Yeah, shared my time with
10 minutes each. That's great.
Thank you, Cahill. I'm glad to have the opportunity to contribute here today to this important debate in relation to the Health Service Executive Governance Bill 2012. And I'm glad the Minister is here, and I think it shows the importance he attaches to trying to sort out this problem in a forward way. Minister, if I was sitting in your seat there today and taking account of the government's efforts to set out a clear vision of the future of the health service and the fundamental and extremely important objective of ensuring greater accountability by the HSE to you directly as Minister for Health, and indeed to your successors. I would not just straight away abolish and dissolve not just the board of the HSE and put in place a new streamlined governance structure, which is basically going to be directors or heads, as you point out. Because I would just straight away abolish them. I wouldn't have any interim steps at all. And I have good reason to have no confidence whatsoever in the structure that has evolved and emerged since 2004, when the old health board structures were abolished. Many of us expressed our fears of what might emerge when this out-of-control bureaucratic labyrinth structure was set in place. And it gives me no pleasure to say that our worst fears have been confirmed and are being confirmed. This was in effect a pyramid of bureaucracy with well-paid managers put in place, all well away from the local management place where they should be placed, and either based in Dublin or Naas or wherever, but which built in a pyramidal fashion upon the old health board management structure, and which, worst of all, effectively removed all decision-making functions and indeed abilities away from the local manager and administrators, who were always best placed with intimate and detailed knowledge and held the most ability to make critical and ongoing decisions at the level of the coal face, right at the counter, face to face with the user or the customer of the service. And these decisions were always decisive, they were quick, and notwithstanding the fact that we may not have always concurred with them, or indeed liked all the decisions, nevertheless they were generally correct, and we must acknowledge that. So they were decisive and correct, and dealt with the problem there and then. This was clearly the position of my almost 30 years of experience as a public representative, dealing with senior health board management officials in Longford, Mullingar or Tullamore. And you had people who were very familiar with the problems, the backgrounds, the circumstances, be they financial or related to the health of somebody involved, the nature or the degree of the emergency at issue. And I want to pay tribute to these people who epitomised everything that one expects in public service. They provided a top class and an efficient and an effective public service, always given with a smile, even if the decisions may well be ones that may well not be what the person wanted, who sought to help. People like the late Tommy O'Hara, an administrator at the Midland Health Board based in Mullingar, a superb administrator. Dory Mannion, Dick Stokes, Donny Murphy, Derry O'Dwyer, Finbar Murphy, I could go on and on. All extraordinary individuals who made thousands of decisions over the years in a highly efficient, productive and thoughtful and caring way, reflecting all that is good in terms of the ethos of public service and public servants. They were aided and abetted by great assistance from the clerical officers right up through the ranks. And for example, what did the HSE then do in just one area? Let us explore it. And I heard Deputy Healy-Rae refer to this, dealing with GMS and the medical cards. They took them away from this efficient form of local administration and centralised them at the post office address in Finglas, well and clearly removed away from the people and that they needed to serve, and showing a disdainful disregard and disrespect for the very people affected. So this was clearly a retrograde step. Let no one tell me anything different. It didn't involve any significant savings, and epitomised and encapsulates why the HSE has lost the confidence of the people and the broad mass of public representatives who come in contact with them. Just look at another example. People come to our clinics with various health issues, need for urgent operations, dental or orthodontic issues in relation to their young children, outcrops and everything else, children at school and with significant dental problems under 14 years of age, and a host of other personal issues. You raise them in the Dáil via PQ, Minister, to yourself. You reply, it is a matter for the Parliamentary Division at the HSE to deal with, and you refer it on, and that's what you do, and I have no doubt about that. It is sent to them, and it disappears into a black hole, from which it might never emerge. And if it does, the people may have borrowed money if they can get it from the credit union now with the new restrictions on them or indeed other financial institutions or wherever, and had the procedure carried out, or they may have died in the interim. What sort of a service is that? In the good old days of the health boards, Minister, for all of their reputed faults, and I agree that it had to be upgraded and refurbished and brought out to the modern era, but nevertheless, they were still a very efficient group. You would have a reply within the week, and you could advise your constituents accordingly. So, Minister, I would today abolish this monster and revert back to a system, an upgraded or modernised health board structure, which at least had a local input, and they would listen. And what is wrong with having politicians having an input and various representatives of professional organisations and indeed staff? That's where it was. You felt you had a representative role. People did not talk down to you or lecture you and make you feel like a nobody. Above all, they had respect for you as a public representative. And I have a sheaf of letters I can show you that I sent to senior managers in the HSE. None of them afforded the courtesy of a reply. I believe the biggest issue they had was wondering how Penrose had got such information which was so accurate. And you expect me, on behalf of the constituents of Lougher Westmeath, I am proud to represent, to have any faith in this body. None whatsoever, when you're treated in such a disrespectful fashion. I always personally reply to people who make their efforts to contact me. It's a fundamental precept of courtesy and respect, and even if I disagree fundamentally with the people who contact me. And Minister, how could I have confidence in a structure which so blatantly has colluded into private and Midland Regional Hospital in Gar, one of the top 3 hospitals in the country for the past decade in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, throughput, output and outcomes of its rightful share of funding, and which engages in spiriting off its rightful share to other hospitals, which in fact is implemented and where we are implementing a policy and they implement a policy which is totally contrary to what you have advocated as Minister ahead. And I heard you say so at Cabinet level, that the money would follow the patient, where there was a clear and demonstrable increase in activity, effectiveness, quality treatment and outputs. Parameters all not just achieved but clearly exceeded in the case of Midland Regional Hospital, Mullingar. And I know you've said that yourself on radio, on TV, and I've heard you. And that is why I have no belief in the HSE. And I will continue to defy you, Minister, no matter what the intents of Section 5 and Section 6 of the bill are, and indeed other changes concerning the relationship between the HSE and yourself as Minister or successor. I wish you well, Minister, in your ambition. And I know you're somebody who's put a lot of thought into this. I wish you well, and you'll have my support. So to make sure that they'll be accountable, to make sure that they reply to us in here, to make sure that the patient follows the money follows the patient. That's your concept. That's what they should do. But I can give you examples where they don't do it, and they refuse to reply to us, and I can show it to you. And I think you're aware of 1 or 2 of them. And I know I didn't spare the rod, but I believe in being truthful. They don't. And that's why I've no time for them earthly. The budget for the hospital was supposed to be 58 million and went to 59. And it was reduced now another 4.4%. And we reduced by 29 people the number, 50 odd people, the people in Mullingar in the hospital. And I know I'm just about to finish. You know, 70 nurses less in the hospital, with only 19 replaced. So the net loss of 51 in the hospital, and we've done our job. So, Minister, you know, we've had the emergency department there with a 50% increase, which emanates from both the Roscommon and Leitrim areas, indeed in Navan catchment areas. And the activity of such patients coming into the emergency departments is higher also, the acuity of them. So the question arises, why didn't the HSE give us an additional allocation to the Midland Regional Hospital in Gar, as it copes with a significant additional intake of such patients, so as to ensure they are afforded the appropriate treatment they deserve? Indeed, if the HSE gave the Midland Regional Hospital in Gar the amount of money they deserve, even in this just one limited area of accommodation ED patients from outside this catchment area, there would not have been a 1 million over expenditure at all in 2012, which overrun was clearly related to this aspect of looking after people from other areas further. So it is clear upon any objective analysis that the Midland Regional Hospital in Gar was punished for being efficient, whereas the opposite should have been the case. This is why, Minister, I'm looking forward to the new hospital groupings which you will be announcing shortly, which will see our excellent hospital group, the Mar Hospital, St Vincent's Hospital, Mullingar, Dublin, 2 excellent hospitals. And there's a clear recognition that Midland Regional Hospital will be the top hospital in the North Leinster area. Give us a few additional resources, a major rehabilitation centre, and about 30 million which is required for new theatres and refurbished theatres. And the excellent staff from consultants, doctors, nurses, paramedics and attendants won't let you down, Minister. They will deliver the next phase of the health reform programme you have planned in a very positive and proactive way, and we will play a constructive role in that.
Thank you, Deputy Nolan.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. I think from the contributions that we've heard today, and indeed from the passionate one from my colleague just there, the HSE's reputation, the brand HSE, is a damaged, uncredible brand that people have very little faith in. And that's not to say that the staff who work there are branded with that, because anybody I ever deal with or talk to, whoever is admitted to hospital or deals with the health services, never does anything but speak extremely highly of the people who deals with them in their care. I just want to put that on the record. But the organisation and its structure, how people interact with it, the way it's administered and the way the bureaucracy operates is something that infuriates people and is causing severe problems and severe issues for people across the country. Which is why I welcome the bill. And I think the bill is a step in the right direction. I would like to see the bill, as it is indeed it is intended to do, being a step along the way to the universal health insurance model. And I think that of all of the things that this government has put in as a priority, and that is in the programme for government as being something that needs to be done, and one of the reasons I support this government so strongly is because of our intention and our desire and our plan to introduce universal health insurance, to finally take economics, ability to pay, your personal circumstances out of your access to healthcare. That for anybody in this country, regardless of who they are, what background, what situation they're in, they will never have to worry about the money in their pocket when they're getting access to health insurance, access to healthcare. And I think if we achieve that in this term in government, we will have achieved something monumental. And it's one of the things that I'm particularly proud to support this government in its pursuance of. I think the number of problems with the HSE structure, and a number of them have been alluded to probably more eloquently by Deputy Penrose. But the accountability of money, where the money goes in. Just today, I was having a discussion with the HSE West about allocations for disability services. And it is my understanding that there has been a national pot of money allocated for disability services, that the reduction of 1.2% was negotiated nationally and is working its way down. But that budget, as it has been allocated, is being interpreted differently in the different HSE regions. So much so that I haven't got a figure yet for what the cut will be in the HSE West, but that it may in fact differ from the figure that was negotiated nationally. So the idea of the directorates, where the money goes through to a single directorate, so that the disability budget goes to the disability directorate, and the disability directorate distributes the money and allocates the money, monitors the money, and makes sure it's getting value for money from the funding, I think is something to be very welcome. I also think the fact that we're getting rid of this fake corporate veil, which is what the HSE was. It was, in my view, used as a way to give the Minister for Health the opportunity to say, that's not my problem, that's the HSE, to create an artificial wall between those who are responsible for the health service, which is us, which are us as public representatives and as a government, with the corporate entity that we could blame and lay accountability at the floor of them. And that needs to change. And I think that this is acknowledged by the Minister and his department as but a step along the way to the complete abolition of the HSE, and I welcome that. I just want to talk a little bit about something very positive that I think has happened in the health service. And I want to give the Minister credit for it, because he gets a lot of knocks, but this is something that I think he does need a lot of credit for. And it's the way in which the health service in Galway has been transformed. Now, it's transforming very positively as part of a Galway and Roscommon hospital group. There's a new CEO, Bill Maher, who came from St. Vincent's, Tony Canavan, who I would know down in Galway, and they're working extremely hard to change the entire management concept with how the hospitals are run. They now have a network of 4 hospitals. They have Galway University Hospital, Merlin Park, Portiuncula in Ballinasloe, and Roscommon. And rather than just saying that every hospital has to do every service, they're saying that Galway is the acute centre, Merlin Park is the step-down centre, Roscommon will be responsible for other functions and so on. And they're using their facilities, they're using their resources cleverly. And it's something that we haven't had before, this clever and proper use of resources. And they're also introducing something which anybody who's worked in the private sector or even in cutting-edge public service bodies should have been in a long time ago. Key performance indicators, tracking what they're doing, having management plans, having targets, having clinical directorates where the actual people who are working in the service sit down with the staff there and they put together plans and they make sure they follow through in them. And believe it or not, the people who are most impressed by this and are most heartened by it are the staff, because they've worked for so long in a leaderless environment. It was often said, and it was to the shame of the previous government, that Galway was the worst run hospital in the state. And now it's turning that around, because it's putting in place a proper plan, proper management, looking at how they're achieving things. And some of the changes that have happened in such a short period of time. This government is only 2 years old. Despite a massive increase in emergency department activities, Galway is the second busiest emergency department in the country. The trolley times are down significantly. They're not gone, but they're down. The progress is being made. The inpatient targets, Galway had one of the worst records for inpatient targets. This year they hit the 9-month target, and they're on course to meet the 8-month target in June 2013. The outpatient targets, they're going through their outpatient list.